My name is Jetty, and for most of my life, I didn't know I was invisible. Not in the dramatic way people imagine. No shouting. No abuse. No cruelty anyone could point to and say, "There, that's the problem." It was quieter than that. Softer. More confusing. I existed in a house full of people who loved each other loudly, just not me. I remember the exact day I learned this. I was 6 years old, sitting on a stiff plastic chair in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and flowers that were already beginning to wilt. My feet didn't touch the ground. They swung back and forth while I waited, clutching a folded piece of paper in my hands. I had drawn it at school. It was a picture of my family. Stick figures, crooked smiles. I had drawn myself holding my mother's hand. I remember thinking it was important to include that detail, as if drawing it could make it true. The door opened, and suddenly the room filled with noise. "He's beautiful. Look at his hair. He has your eyes." Everyone rushed forward. My aunt. My grandmother. Nurses I had never seen before. They formed a tight circle around the hospital bed where my mother lay, exhausted but glowing, her arms wrapped around a tiny bundle. My baby brother, Aaron. I waited. I waited for someone to say my name. I waited for my mother to look at me. I waited for my father to notice I was still sitting there, swinging my legs, holding something I had made just for this moment. No one did. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Time felt strange in that room. I stood up once, thinking maybe they couldn't see me from where I sat. I took a step forward, then stopped. There was no space for me inside that circle. So I sat back down. Eventually, my father turned just enough to glance in my direction. "Jetty, sit still," he said distractedly. "Don't touch anything." I nodded. I unfolded the paper once, looked at the drawing, then folded it again, smaller this time, and slid it into my pocket. I never showed it to anyone. That was the first thing I ever learned about love. That it could be real. That it could fill a room. And that it could pass right over you without ever landing. From that day on, the house changed. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just enough that I felt it in small, quiet ways. Aaron cried, and someone came running. I cried, and someone told me to stop. Aaron spilled his food, and it was cute. I spilled mine, and it was careless. When relatives visited, they brought gifts for him. Toys that made noise. Clothes he would grow into. They patted my head and said, "You're such a good big sister," as if that was a personality, not a role. At first, I tried harder. I cleaned my room without being asked. I used my inside voice. I smiled even when I didn't feel like it. I thought maybe if I made myself easier to love, someone would notice. They noticed the convenience. They didn't notice me. At night, I lay in bed listening to my parents talk in the living room. "He's special," my mother said once, her voice soft. "He just needs more attention," my father replied. No one ever said that about me. By the time I turned 8, I understood something important: asking for attention only reminded people you existed. It didn't make them care. So I stopped asking. I learned how to move quietly through the house. I learned how to read moods from footsteps. I learned when to disappear into my room and when to appear helpful enough to avoid criticism. I learned how to be low maintenance. Teachers loved me. "She's so independent," they said. So mature. My parents loved that too. Independence, I would later learn, is often just neglect that learned how to behave. One evening, when Aaron was about 4, he broke a glass in the kitchen. It shattered across the floor. He screamed. My mother rushed in. My father followed. It's okay, she said, scooping him up. You're okay. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching them sweep glass from his feet, checking his hands, kissing his forehead. Later that same week, I dropped a plate. The sound was just as loud. My father looked at me sharply. What's wrong with you? I cleaned it up alone. That was the moment I stopped comparing. Because comparison implies competition. And I was never competing. I was just there. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and made a quiet decision without knowing how big it would become. If no one was going to see me, I would learn how to survive without being seen. I didn't know yet that this decision would shape my entire life. I didn't know it would teach me how to leave without saying goodbye. I didn't know it would one day save me. All I knew was that something in me had gone still. And once something goes still long enough, it stops reaching out. By the time I turned 9, I understood that my family ran on rules. They were never written down. No one explained them to me. But they were enforced all the same. Aaron was allowed to take up space. I was allowed to behave. Aaron was allowed to fail loudly. I was expected to succeed quietly. Aaron's emotions were treated like emergencies. Mine were treated like inconveniences. At first, I didn't recognize these rules as unfair. Children rarely do. We assume the world we're born into is normal. We assume love looks the way it's given to us. So I adapted. I remember one afternoon clearly. Aaron was sitting at the kitchen table, his homework spread out in front of him. He was whining, his pencil rolling between his fingers. My mother stood over him, patient but tired. I don't get it, he complained. It's stupid. It's not stupid, she said gently. You're just tired. Take your time. I was sitting on the floor nearby, my own homework already finished. I had gotten a question wrong on a math test earlier that week. Just one. I held the paper in my hands, debating whether to show it to her. Finally, I stood. Mom? I said softly. She glanced at me, distracted. What is it, Judy? I got one wrong, I said, holding up the paper. I didn't understand. She sighed. Not loudly. Just enough. You're fine, she said. It's just one question. Then she turned back to Aaron. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, then slowly lowered the paper and went back to the floor. That was the first time I learned that needing help didn't always mean you'd get it. As Aaron grew, his presence filled the house. His voice was loud. His opinions were louder. He interrupted conversations, burst into rooms, demanded attention without hesitation. And somehow, the world bent around him. Boys will be boys, my father said when Aaron broke things. He's sensitive, my mother said when Aaron yelled. He just needs time, they said when Aaron failed. Time was something I was never offered. When I was 10, I cried at the dinner table. I don't even remember why. Something small. Something that had been building quietly for weeks. My chest felt tight, and the tears came before I could stop them. My father looked at me with irritation. What's wrong now? He asked. I tried to speak, but my voice shook. Before I could finish, Aaron laughed. Why are you crying? He asked. You're weird. My mother frowned, not at him, but at me. Judy, she said. You're making things awkward. That word stayed with me. Awkward. As if my emotions were an inconvenience everyone else had to step around. I wiped my face with my sleeve and nodded. I'm fine. And from that day on, I made sure I always was. At school, teachers praised me. So responsible. So mature. So independent. They didn't know those traits weren't chosen. They were survival skills. At home, independence meant no one checked on me. Maturity meant no one worried. Responsibility meant I was reliable, but replaceable. I learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken. I learned to clean without being asked. I learned to make myself useful so my presence would be justified. Love, I discovered, was conditional. One evening, my parents sat Aaron and me down. "We need you to help out more," my father said, looking at me. I nodded automatically. "Aaron has a lot going on," my mother added, rubbing his back. "We're counting on you to understand." Aaron smirked at me. I didn't argue. I didn't ask what I got in return. Because by then, I knew the answer. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle into silence. I wondered what it would feel like to be chosen without asking. To be comforted without earning it. To be loved without being useful. The questions scared me. So I stopped asking them. Instead, I made another quiet decision. If I couldn't be loved for who I was, I would be valued for what I could do. And if that still wasn't enough, one day, I would leave. By the time I entered my teenage years, I no longer questioned my place in the family. I knew it. I was the extra set of hands. The backup plan. The one who would handle it. If something needed to be done, it somehow became my responsibility before anyone even asked. Aaron entered his teenage years loudly. He slammed doors. He argued. He demanded things with confidence that stunned me. And my parents responded the same way they always had, with patience, concern, and endless explanations. "He's going through a phase," my mother said. "He needs guidance," my father said. When I went through changes, quiet ones, invisible ones, no one noticed. I remember the first time my parents left us alone overnight. Aaron was 13. I was 15. "We'll be back tomorrow afternoon," my mother said, already halfway out the door. "Jetty, make sure he eats." She didn't ask if I was okay with it. She didn't ask if I had plans. She didn't even look at me when she said it. I nodded, because nodding had become instinct. That night, Aaron refused to eat what I cooked. "This is gross," he said, pushing the plate away. I followed the recipe, I replied quietly. "I don't care," he snapped. "Make something else." I stared at him, waiting for a joke that didn't come. So I cooked again. Later, when he stayed up too late and overslept the next morning, my parents scolded me. "You should have made sure he went to bed," my father said. I apologized. For his choices. That was the year I learned a dangerous lesson: responsibility without authority. I was expected to manage things I had no control over, and blamed when they failed. It seeped into everything. If Aaron forgot homework, it was because I didn't remind him. If Aaron acted out, it was because I didn't calm him. If something broke, I should have been watching. I became smaller under the weight of expectations no one acknowledged. At 16, I got my first job. I didn't ask permission. I informed them. My father frowned. "Won't that distract you from school?" "I can handle it," I said quickly. He shrugged. "Fine. Just don't let it affect your responsibilities at home." I knew what that meant. My money would be mine, but my time never would be. Working felt different. The manager expected me to show up on time, do my job, and go home. No emotional guessing. No unspoken rules. If I worked hard, I was acknowledged. If I made a mistake, it was corrected, not held against my character. I loved it. I saved every paycheck. Quietly. Carefully. I didn't tell my parents how much I had. Something in me knew that if they knew, it would stop being mine. Aaron didn't work. He needs to focus on school, my parents said. He has potential. I wondered what they thought I had. One night, after a long shift, I came home exhausted. Aaron was in the living room, gaming loudly. "Can you turn it down?" I asked softly. He didn't look at me. No. I stood there for a moment, tired beyond words. "I worked all day," I said. "I just need quiet." My father looked up from his chair. "Don't start," he said. "You know how he is." Something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Not visibly. But it cracked. That night, I sat on my bed counting my savings. Each number felt like a step away. Each dollar felt like proof that this wasn't all my life would be. I realized then that no one was coming to rescue me. Not my parents. Not fairness. Not time. If I wanted a different life, I would have to build it myself. And if I built it quietly enough, no one would even notice when I left. The first place I ever felt competent was a room no one at home cared about. The computer lab. It was small and always cold, filled with the low hum of machines and the clicking of keyboards. Most students treated it like a break period. They played games, whispered, waited for the bell. I sat in the back, hands folded, watching lines of code appear on the screen like a language meant only for people willing to listen. The teacher explained how commands worked. If you told the computer to do something incorrectly, it didn't argue. It didn't raise its voice. It didn't judge you. It simply didn't work. And when you fixed the mistake, it responded immediately, clean, exact, honest. For the first time in my life, effort had a visible outcome. I stayed after class that day. Then I stayed again the next week. Soon, staying late became routine. I borrowed books from the library, old ones with worn covers and handwritten notes in the margins. At night, while the house slept, I practiced quietly in my room, the glow of the screen lighting up walls that had never seen ambition before. Coding didn't demand approval. It didn't care if I was invisible. It responded to precision, not favoritism. I fell in love with it slowly and completely. One evening, I decided to tell my parents. I rehearsed the words in my head first, like I did with everything important. "I think I'm good at this. There's a program. It could help me." I waited until dinner, until the television was off and Aaron wasn't talking. "I found something I really like," I said carefully. My mother glanced up. "What is it?" "Programming," I said. "Coding. There's a summer program." "We'll see," she said, already distracted, already moving on. The words landed softly. But their meaning was heavy. We never talked about it again. 2 weeks later, Aaron came home with a new gaming system. My parents watched him set it up, smiling, engaged, asking questions. I sat on the couch and said nothing. That was the moment I understood something clearly. My dreams had no place in that house. After that, I stopped sharing. I stopped mentioning the computer lab. I stopped talking about college ideas. I stopped letting excitement show on my face. Every dream I had, I folded inward and stored somewhere quiet, safe from dismissal. At school, teachers noticed. "You have talent," one said. "You should consider this seriously," another told me. I nodded. I thanked them. I never brought it home. At home, I was still the helper. The quiet one. The reliable one. Nothing about me changed, except inside. Late one night, I sat on my bed, laptop balanced on my knees, debugging a simple program. It wasn't complicated. But when it finally worked, when the code ran cleanly without errors, something tightened in my chest. Not sadness. Relief. I whispered to the empty room, "I did it." No one heard me. And that was okay. Because for the first time, I didn't need them to. I realized then that my future would not be announced. It would be built quietly, piece by piece, while everyone else was busy looking elsewhere. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling, heart steady. One day, I would leave. And when I did, they wouldn't even notice. College was not freedom at first. It was distance. And distance, I learned, can be terrifying when you've spent your whole life being defined by other people's needs. The day I left for college, the house was unusually quiet. My bags were packed the night before, neatly, efficiently, without ceremony. I stood in my bedroom doorway for a long moment, looking at the walls I had grown up with. They were bare. No photos. No trophies. Nothing that suggested someone important had lived there. My mother knocked lightly. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. I always nodded. The drive was short. Mostly silence. My father talked about traffic. My mother reminded me to call. Aaron sat in the back seat with headphones on, absorbed in his phone. No one asked how I felt. When we arrived, they helped carry my things up 2 flights of stairs. My mother hugged me quickly, the way people hug someone they plan to see again soon. My father shook my hand, as if this were a business arrangement. "Study hard," he said. Then they left. I stood alone in my dorm room, surrounded by boxes, listening to footsteps fade down the hallway. The door clicked shut behind them, and for the first time in my life, there was no one on the other side expecting anything from me. The silence felt enormous. The first few weeks were the hardest. Everyone around me seemed to belong somewhere. Roommates talked about family group chats, care packages, weekend visits. Phones rang constantly. Laughter echoed through the halls. My phone stayed quiet. I called home at first. Out of habit. Out of hope. The conversations were brief. "How's school?" my mother asked. "Fine," I said. Then she talked about Aaron. His stress. His grades. His mood. My father asked if I needed money, not because he was worried, but because responsibility demanded the question. No one asked if I was lonely. So I stopped calling. I filled my time instead. I worked part-time at a cafe near campus. I stayed late in the computer lab. I took extra courses. I learned how to disappear into productivity the same way I once disappeared into silence. During the holidays, I stayed. The dorms emptied. Campuses became quiet, almost echoing. I ate alone. I walked alone. Studied alone. Some nights, the loneliness crept in slowly, wrapping around my chest until it hurt to breathe. But even then, it felt cleaner than home. No tension. No expectations. No invisible rules. I realized something unsettling. No one missed me. And somehow, that didn't break me. In my second year, I started to change. Not outwardly. Inwardly. I spoke more in class. I applied for internships without asking anyone's opinion. When professors encouraged me, I believed them, just a little. I stopped waiting for permission. When I earned scholarships, I didn't announce them. When I succeeded, I celebrated quietly. The habit of keeping joy to myself had become instinct. Home remained distant. Calls were rare now. When I did speak to my parents, the conversations felt forced, as if we were all pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. The summer after my third year, I stayed on campus again. One night, I sat on a bench outside the dorm, watching lights flicker on in windows that weren't mine. Families moved in and out of lives effortlessly. I realized then that I had crossed an invisible line. I no longer felt like I belonged to my family. and I no longer needed to. That realization didn't come with relief. It came with clarity. When graduation approached, my parents attended the ceremony. They clapped. They smiled. They took photos. Later, my father said, "We're proud of you." It should have meant something. It didn't. Because pride, after absence, feels hollow. That night, alone in my room, I packed again. Not just my things. My expectations. After graduation, life didn't suddenly become easier. But it became clearer. I moved into a small apartment not far from my first real job. It was nothing special: thin walls, uneven floors, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. But it was mine. Every object inside it existed because I put it there. No one had opinions. No one rearranged anything. No one asked what I was doing or why. For the first time, my space reflected me. The job itself was demanding. Long hours. Steep learning curves. Moments where I stared at my screen wondering if I was smart enough to be there at all. But when I struggled, no one dismissed me. When I succeeded, it was acknowledged plainly. "You did good work on this," my manager said once, pointing at my code. The words hit me harder than I expected. I nodded, professional on the outside, while something inside me shifted. Praise that didn't come with conditions felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. But it was real. My parents called occasionally. The conversations followed the same pattern. "How's work?" my mother asked. "Busy," I replied. Then came Aaron. Aaron was stressed. Aaron wasn't sure what he wanted. Aaron needed time. Aaron needed support. I listened. I always listened. Once, after a particularly long day, I said quietly, "I got a raise." There was a pause. "That's good," my father said. Then silence. A moment later, "Your brother's been having a hard time lately." Something inside me finally stopped trying. I stopped calling first. Weeks passed. Then months. No one asked why. I furnished my apartment slowly, one chair, one lamp, one quiet decision at a time. I cooked for myself. Ate alone without feeling watched. Came home late without explaining. Slept deeply. I realized that my nervous system had been tense my entire life and was only now learning how to rest. One evening, I got sick. Nothing dramatic. A fever. Exhaustion. I lay on my couch wrapped in a blanket, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the familiar instinct to reach out. I didn't. There was no one to call. Who would come? And for the first time, that truth didn't hurt. It just was. I made tea. Took medicine. Slept. I took care of myself. At work, opportunities came slowly but steadily. Bigger projects. More responsibility. Trust. At home, silence remained. When I visited during the holidays one year, the house felt smaller. Louder. More chaotic. Aaron barely acknowledged me. My parents asked surface questions, as if afraid to dig too deep and find out how little they knew. I stayed 2 days. That was enough. Driving back to my apartment, I felt something settle into place. I had crossed another invisible line. I no longer felt like their daughter waiting for approval. I felt like a person who had moved on. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The same way I had learned to do everything. The idea of leaving didn't arrive dramatically. There was no argument. No breaking point. No final straw. It came quietly, the way all my realizations had come after long acceptance. The email appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. A recruiter from a company in California. A position that aligned perfectly with my skills. Better pay. Better growth. A fresh start that didn't include anyone who knew the old version of me. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Then I said yes. I didn't tell my parents right away. Not because I was hiding it, but because I was curious. Curious to see if anyone would notice the changes before I announced them. Curious to see if anyone would ask questions. Curious to know whether I mattered enough to interrupt their routines. Weeks passed. I sold furniture. Packed boxes. Changed addresses. Updated documents. My life shifted quietly, piece by piece. No calls came. When I finally mentioned casually that I might be moving, my mother responded without concern. "Just don't forget to call," she said. I didn't remind her later. The day I left, I locked my apartment door and stood there for a moment, key still in my hand. I felt no sadness. No fear. Only clarity. At the airport, surrounded by strangers going everywhere and nowhere, I realized something strange. I felt lighter. Not because I was running away, but because I was finally moving forward without dragging expectations behind me. California felt unreal at first. The air was different. The light was sharper. People spoke quickly, confidently, as if they belonged wherever they stood. I found an apartment. Started work. Built routines. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. No one called to ask where I was. Not once. I watched my phone the way you watch something you already know won't happen, out of habit, not hope. 6 months later, my father finally called. "Your brother's getting married," he said. "You'll need to be here." No greeting. No concern. No question. I sat on my couch, staring at the wall. "Where exactly is here?" I asked calmly. There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I moved," I said. 6 months ago. I live in California now." The silence on the other end was heavy. "You didn't tell us," he said. I almost laughed. "You didn't ask." That was the moment everything became clear. I hadn't disappeared suddenly. I had faded slowly, and they never noticed. The silence after I told my father I had moved felt heavier than anything he could have said. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then he exhaled sharply. "So you think you can just disappear?" he said. I leaned back against the couch, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the familiar tone return to his voice. The one that carried authority. Expectation. Control. "I didn't disappear," I replied. "I moved." "That's not the point," he said quickly. "The point is, you didn't tell us." I almost smiled. Because suddenly, the truth was so clear it hurt. They weren't upset because they missed me. They were upset because I had acted without permission. "You need to come back for the wedding," he continued. "Her family is very important. They expect to see a complete family." Complete. The word echoed in my mind. "So this is about appearances?" I asked. He ignored the question. "This isn't about you," he said. "This is about your brother." Of course it was. I told him I couldn't make it. The response was immediate. "You're being selfish," he said. "After everything we've done for you." I waited. Let the words settle. "Name one thing," I said quietly. There was a pause. Then anger. "If you don't come," he said, "don't bother calling yourself part of this family." The threat was meant to hurt. It didn't. I laughed softly, not mockingly, but with a strange kind of relief. You can't take something from me that I never had, I said. My mother called later that night. Her voice was softer. Strategic. Jetty, please, she said. Just this once. People will ask questions. Did you ask questions? I replied, when I left. She didn't answer. She told me Aaron was stressed. That the wedding was important. That family mattered. I listened. Then I said no again. After the calls ended, I sat alone in my apartment, the city humming outside my window. I didn't feel angry. I felt free. For the first time, I had said no, and nothing collapsed. No punishment came. No consequences followed. They didn't chase me. They didn't apologize. They simply went on without me. And so did I. Time didn't heal the distance between us. It only made it permanent. Years passed quietly. Not in a dramatic blur, but in steady increments marked by routines I chose for myself. Workdays turned into promotions. Small apartments turned into better ones. Friendships deepened. My life grew wider, fuller, rooted in places my family had never touched. And in all that time, my phone remained mostly silent. No birthday calls. No holiday messages. No casual just checking in. At first, the absence surprised me. Then it confirmed what I already knew. I had not been missed. I had been absent, and those were not the same thing. The call came on an ordinary evening. I was washing dishes, the window open, the sound of traffic drifting in. My phone buzzed on the counter. I almost ignored it. The number was familiar, but distant, like a song you hadn't heard in years. My mother. I answered slowly. Jetty, she said, and my name sounded strange in her mouth. Fragile. Unsure. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I almost didn't, I replied. She laughed softly, then stopped. Your father isn't well, she said. He's been asking about you. The words didn't land the way she probably expected. Not with panic. Not with guilt. Just with weight. I'm sorry to hear that, I said honestly. There was a pause, as if she were waiting for more. Over the next few weeks, the calls continued. Updates. Requests. Careful questions disguised as concern. Aaron was struggling. The stress of adulthood had caught up with him. He wasn't sure what direction to take. He needed guidance. Support. You've always been strong, my mother said one night. You always knew how to handle things. I closed my eyes. I recognized the pattern immediately. They weren't reaching out because they had changed. They were reaching out because they needed something again. My father came up often in those conversations. How quiet he'd become. How tired. How he asked why I never visited. I wondered when he had started wondering that. Years too late. One evening, after a long call, I finally spoke the truth. You didn't notice when I left, I said calmly. You didn't call. You didn't ask where I was. You only reached out when something went wrong. The line went silent. My mother sighed. We did the best we could. I had waited my whole life to hear something different. I know, I said. And this is the result. They asked me to come back. Just for a visit. Just for a while. Just to help. I said no. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just no. I offered help in the ways I could give it, resources, advice, distance. But I didn't step back into the role I had escaped. I had learned something important in the years apart. Love that only shows up when it's convenient is not love. It's dependency. When Aaron finally called me himself, his voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "I didn't realize," he said, "how different things were for you." I believed him. But belief didn't change history. "I know," I said gently. We didn't talk long after that. Some truths don't need discussion. After the call ended, I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, breathing evenly. There was sadness, but no regret. I had chosen distance, not because I was cold, but because I finally understood the cost of closeness. And I was no longer willing to pay for it. The news came early in the morning. My phone rang before the sun had fully risen, the sound cutting through the quiet of my apartment. I knew what it was before I answered. Some calls announced themselves without words. My father had passed away in his sleep. There was no dramatic reaction inside me. No collapse. No rush of unfinished emotions. Just a long, steady breath, as if my body had already prepared for this moment years ago. "I'm sorry," I said to my mother, and I meant it. Grief doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it enters like a familiar guest, taking a seat you've already cleared. They asked if I would come back for the funeral. I didn't answer immediately. I spent the day thinking, not about him, but about myself. About the child who learned early how to shrink. About the woman who had built a life without witnesses. About the distance that had once felt like loss and now felt like protection. I decided to go. Not for closure. Not for forgiveness. But to acknowledge what had been. Standing in the old house again felt like stepping into a memory that no longer belonged to me. The walls were the same. The furniture unchanged. But the air felt smaller. Aaron looked older. Tired. Unsure of where to place himself around me. "I didn't know how much you carried," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. That was all. At the funeral, people spoke about my father's strength. His discipline. His dedication to family. I listened without interruption. Their version of him didn't erase mine. It simply existed beside it. When it was over, my mother asked if I would stay longer. I shook my head. "I have a life," I said. Not sharply. Not defensively. Just truthfully. Back in California, I unpacked my bag slowly, placing things back where they belonged. The rhythm of my life resumed without resistance. I realized then that I no longer needed acknowledgement from people who hadn't seen me. I had built something solid. Quiet. Earned. The revenge wasn't disappearance. It wasn't refusal. It wasn't even success. It was peace. Some families teach you who you are. Others teach you who you must become without them. I chose the second lesson. And I didn't look back.